Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet, the go-to podcast for parents with multiple kids, especially those with twins, triplets, or more, who are navigating the maze of modern family life and personal finance. Whether you're overwhelmed by education or retirement planning, parenting dilemmas, career transitions, or trying to define your purpose and plan, we're here to guide you with empathy, encouragement, and expertise. Hosted by Paul Fenner, founder of Tama Capital, a certified financial planner and parent to 4 kids, including a set of triplets. Our podcast is your ally in the quest for financial peace of mind, proving that money matters, but family comes first. Subscribe now and join our community of empowered parents at tamacapital.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Tama may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
What does comprehensive financial planning even mean? At Tama Capital, it means a family office where lifestyle planning such as retirement, college, portfolio management, and tax prep and planning are all under one umbrella. But it goes beyond numbers. We focus as much on the emotional side of financial planning as we do on the financial side. We get you. We understand your challenges of building a family, business or career, and a healthy life. We are devoted to wealth planning for families like yours because we are you. Learn how our family can help your family by visiting tamacapital.com. How do you bridge the gap between the anxiety and fear that you're feeling and the actual reality of your current situation? Today we have Dr. Jennifer Dragonette back on to talk about a listener question that we received about the difficulties of transitioning into retirement and being in retirement and the psychological switch that goes from being a saver and identifying as a saver for the majority of your life to now having to spend what you've saved for decades. And that transition is extremely difficult. And even if you have the money to afford the lifestyle and the retirement that you want, you may still have the challenge of actually spending the money. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Jennifer Dragonette. All right, Dr. Jen, welcome back. How are you?
I'm doing well, Paul.
There's a topic that I wanted to bring up. I think you may have brought this up in one of our previous conversations, this topic called acceptance commitment therapy. And what I would like for you to do for our audience is kind of explain what that is. And we're going to tie this into a listener question that came in that I think aligns really well to this. And we'll talk through that question and how you might be able to approach or give guidance to this person on this topic. So let's start with that as far as what is acceptance commitment therapy. And I think there's an acronym called ACT for short.
That's right. So acceptance and commitment therapy, it's one of the few therapies that isn't called ACT, it's called ACT, partly because it's really behavioral. So it's been around for about 30 years. It was created by a researcher and psychologist named Dr. Stephen Hayes. And for me, when I was going through graduate school, there was a real focus on choosing a theoretical orientation. So we learned all these different types of therapy. And when I learned ACT, it was the one that really clicked for me, just in terms of the way I think about the world and the way I might be able to relate that to my clients. So ACT is based on a few principles. Like I mentioned, it's really a behavioral therapy, and it's about a few different things. So one is present moment awareness, also known as mindfulness. We've talked about mindfulness a few times in our conversations. Mindfulness not necessarily being meditation, although that's a form of mindfulness, but mindfulness more being present moment awareness, paying attention on purpose in what's happening now, as opposed to the future or the past, which becomes really important. And we'll talk about this in relationship to your question. It's also about acceptance. So that's part of it, acceptance and commitment therapy, acceptance of reality as it is, rather than as it says it is. So it kind of is starting to set up this distance between what we think and what is actually happening. A couple other pieces of ACT are, and it's not so important that the terminology is what my clients understand, but this idea of cognitive diffusion, which I know is a mouthful, it's this idea that we're stepping back from our thoughts. And those of you who can see me, I always kind of do this hand out in front, like the thoughts are out there. We're having the thoughts, but we aren't the thoughts that we're having. And this becomes really important, especially when we're having judgmental thoughts or worry thoughts, things that are trying to kind of catch us. If we can separate from those thoughts and see it as a thought rather than as something that's real, we have a lot more agency about what we do. And then we are the context for these thoughts. So we are the person inside of us, kind of this witness observer self inside that's having thoughts, that's having experiences. And if we can separate back from them, we can recognize that we have a lot more choice about what we do. And then the final two pieces of ACT are something that we've talked about before, which is values identification, really figuring out what's important to you at your core. And then the ACT part is committed action. So moving toward our values, moving in the direction of what's important to us, even if we have thoughts coming with us saying, no, you can't do that, or that's too scary, or that won't work. So combined, it's really about psychological flexibility. It's about taking reality as it is, accepting what we need to accept about it rather than trying to wrestle with it and make it be different. And then moving toward what's important to us, even if we have these old messages saying, no, you can't do that, or that's too scary.
So I think you just summed it up, but if I use my own words with that, I think one word that comes to mind is, and we talk about this, I swear every conversation, is awareness, and identifying that gap between what's reality and what we're actually feeling.
Yep, exactly. I often, and ACT does this a lot, it uses a lot of imagery or metaphors. And so often if there's a thought that's trying to get us, right? You can't do that. That's too scary. I know this will come up today. You won't be able to afford that, right? I like to actually close my eyes and picture that thought. And I know that might sound a little strange. Oftentimes when I do that with a client, they can picture it like a little monster or a gremlin. Or a couple of years ago, someone that I was working with imagined their anxiety like a little spiky COVID ball. Right. And if we can separate out from the worry or the anxiety, we can see it as something that is happening to us rather than something that is part of us.
It's interesting because I was just reading this actually a few nights ago. Is that similar to what you might describe as a thought experience as far as like that visualization goes? Because I was reading an article about Einstein actually, and he used to do this a lot. Actually, it was in a book called How to Make a Few $1 Billion by Brad Jacobs, who was a CEO of a couple really big companies. And he uses this a lot in his daily practice as a CEO, these thought experiments. And he used Einstein as an example of, it's famously Einstein pictured himself like riding this beam of light.
Yeah, it's very helpful sometimes to have some imagery that we can attach to. And a lot of the mindfulness exercises that people do are just that, where we're imagining our thoughts being a certain thing. I think we've all heard of the idea of imagining your thoughts like clouds floating by or like leaves on a stream. We can also imagine ourselves having these thoughts, and sometimes even just changing the language around how we talk about thoughts rather than I'm worried, saying I'm having the thought that I'm worried, or worry is really trying to get me today. It separates it out just enough. And then that imagery can help us recognize that these things are not actually us, right? These are just experiences that we're having or sensations that we're having. And that puts us back in the driver's seat in terms of what we do with our life.
So the listeners may be wondering like, well, where's the tie-in to financial planning with all this? And the tie-in is that we had a listener email me who's going through I'll call it a really challenging transition. This person, we'll call her Maeve. Maeve has been retired and she's struggling right now because she feels guilty about spending money. And there's this, I think, overriding fear for her that she's going to run out of money. And it does not matter how much I try to convince her, show her data, empathize with her, that the chances of that happening are really, really small. But for her, it's really difficult to get over that anxiety and that fear, whether it's, I think going back to what you're talking about with ACT, whether it's reality or not. And as we kind of pull back the layers a little bit on maybe why she felt this way, Maeve went into a lot of detail about her upbringing, what money was like growing up for her, what money was like going through college and into her career, and the relationships that she had, and all of these kind of life transitions along the way that had this impact on her from a financial standpoint, both good and bad, both perceived and real. And so as she was pouring her heart out to me in this email, I had you first on my mind. I'm like, this is a topic to bring up with Dr. Jen on trying to figure out like how to help her relinquish some of this fear or anxiety, and how do you go about doing that? Because I know the one thing I do know, and being in situations like this before, is trying to just show someone or a family or couple data and say, look, these are the numbers, you're going to be fine, does not work.
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, and I love that we're starting to get listener questions, because I think that's sometimes the best way to really explain these concepts, is to take a real person and look at how this is contributing to pain in their life, and really not necessarily allow them to live the type of life that they want to be living. I really empathize with Maeve. I have had that thought and feeling before, and I think a lot of us have, where we grow up in a mindset, and it's not the fault of our parents. It's just part of how our society functions, that we're told, save and don't spend and make sure you have enough, and, all of the fear-based messages that we get. And it's not a bad message, because of course the opposite is also scary, and we don't want to be, frivolous and end up at the end of our life, really, really in dire straits. However, a lot of people are exactly where Maeve is, where they have saved, they've worked hard, they're at their retirement age, they're at the point in their life where we've all been kind of hoping to get to, and it's still extremely hard for them to, start loosening up those purse strings or do things that they've really always wanted to do. And so I do think ACT is a nice perspective to take that from, and we can kind of go piece by piece with it. Part of what you're saying, Paul, is acceptance, right? Acceptance of reality as it is, rather than as it says it is. And you're right that it's hard to just say to someone, don't worry about it. Don't think that way. Don't have that thought. Our brain doesn't work very well like that. So what actually happens if we tell ourselves, don't think this, our brain says, oh, Jen doesn't want to think this thought. I'm going to check back periodically to make sure she's not thinking that thought, right? So it actually kind of keeps that thought alive. The thought being, I'm going to run out of money, or this won't be okay. So acceptance is, wow, I keep having that thought. I'm noticing that I keep having that thought. Acceptance is, wow, that thought is coming up to me because of my history, maybe because of messages that I learned from my family growing up. Maybe I had relatives growing up in the Depression or something like that. And so acceptance is, okay, it makes sense that I'm having that thought. We're not playing tug of war with those thoughts anymore. The other piece is this mindful awareness of what is actually happening now, rather than what's happening in the future or what's happened in the past. Because all of us have had different experiences in the past, and yet we're not there now. We're not in the future yet. We're here now in this moment, and things are actually probably okay. So what I would say about, ways to move through that is to do some of those values exercises that we've done in previous episodes, where it's really about figuring out, what do you stand for in this world? And I can't remember if I've mentioned this particular exercise. It's a very powerful one, which is imagining your own funeral, imagining that you are somehow, right, somehow able to hear someone speaking about you and your life and all of the wonderful things that you've done, and the ways that you've shown up for people. And most of us, if we do that, having a lot of money left over is not part of that eulogy, right? It's the impact that we've had on our friends and family. It's the amazing experiences that we've had and the ways that we've really lived into our values. Or you can do some real exercises like I've described before, where you try to figure out what are these 3 or 4 words that really drive me. And then this is the act part. The behavioral part is, can I move just a tiny bit toward those values? It doesn't have to mean that you say to Maeve, okay, Maeve, don't worry about anything. Just start traveling the world and just change your life entirely. That's very scary for us. But maybe it's, what's one little thing that you could do this week to move closer to the things that are important to you, to spend time with the people you love, to be generous with yourself as someone who deserves generosity and care, rather than really giving into those gremlins that are saying to you, you won't have enough. It's not going to be enough. You're not going to be okay.
I think to me, it's when I received her email that really resonated with me was the fact that she took so much time and went into this in such great depth. And it's something that I've been talking to my families about and trying to really, to your point, Jen, get them to hone in on their what I would call their purpose and objectives. Like what is their why?
Yeah.
And then behind that why, what are the things that they really want to accomplish? And I think for Maeve, that's what it really tugged on my heart when she went into all these life transitions that she's been through. And some of them I knew only at the surface level, but understanding that really, I think, helps me as an advisor understand her even more and be able to have more in-depth conversations that aren't about the numbers, aren't about the dollars and cents, if you will, and to get clarity around that purpose and that objectives. Because one of her objectives is to be generous, to be able to give to organizations that she believes in. And one of the things that was this reality that she's currently in is that I feel like I can't do that. I can't make those donations to these organizations because I have this fear. And so that goes against like what she wants to do. And so I really want to help. That's one of the reasons why I really want to help be able to provide the guidance and advice to her so that, no, Maeve, you can do this and this is why.
Absolutely. There's a metaphor that I use a lot in ACT when I'm using ACT principles with my clients, which is the passengers on the bus metaphor. And it's a really simple one. I also use this with kids. You can draw it. You can do some art therapy around it. Even adult clients can do this, where imagine that you are driving a bus and all of the thoughts and fears and life experiences and Maeve's life experiences would be part of this. They're all passengers on your bus. There's a passenger back there that says, oh, no, you can't do that. What if you run out of money? And there's a passenger on the bus that's calling you names and you're so stupid for thinking that you can do this. And it really is often how we talk to ourselves. And there's a passenger on the bus that's your great grandmother who did run out of money, maybe. All of these doubts and fears and thoughts are back there, including the thoughts saying, I'll make this go away for you. You don't have to think these thoughts, right? This kind of manager thought. We've all got those too. Because believe it or not, we avoid aspects of our experience sometimes by figuring it out, by thinking about it, by developing these thinking strategies to make those thoughts go away. And as I just said, it really doesn't work. So we're imagining that we're driving this bus and all of those thoughts and feelings are in the bus behind us and they're talking to us and they're getting loud. And we have this destination that we want to get to. Let's say in Maeve's case, she really wants to donate generously, to donate to organizations that matter to her. She wants to have a legacy in that way. So she's driving her bus toward generosity. That's her value. And all of these voices behind her are saying, no, you can't, you can't, you can't. And so what we often do is we stop the bus, we go in the back. It's like that mom voice, be quiet back there. I'm going to pull this bus over, right? And when we do that, we're not driving toward what's important to us. We're wrestling with that thought, or we're wrestling with those experiences. Or maybe we try not to let them on the bus in the first place, but then we're still engaged with that. So what we really can do, and this isn't easy, is keep driving the bus anyway. even with the voices. And I know as parents, right, sometimes we have to just drive the car, even with all the
Right.
noise in the background, right? We just keep driving our bus. And maybe the voices get louder because they don't like that we're ignoring them, or they don't like that we're not taking their input into account, and we can drive anyway. And maybe we only drive a block and she makes a little donation and feels proud of herself for having that generosity and recognizing that that's important to her. And then that empowers her to drive another block or two. And this isn't the reason to do it. This is the tricky part. Oftentimes, though, those voices do quiet down when we start saying to them, you can say anything you want in the background. I'm still driving my bus towards what's important to me. They may quiet down, they may not. But here's the cool part. You're moving in the direction of what's important to you, even if they're still there.
I think the other thing that makes what we do special, and I think I've probably talked about this before, and I feel like I keep mentioning this to the families that I meet with at TAMA, is that situations like Maeve, whether she realizes it or not, she's helping everyone else in the TAMA family, all the people that are listening to this, the people that you work with in your practice, because it's getting a situation out there that's probably not talked about enough.
Mm-hmm.
And even more specifically is this transition to retirement. I don't think is talked about enough. And I'm starting to have conversations with people my age in their late 40s and early 50s about you really need to slow down and give yourself the gift of this time that we keep talking about, I swear, over and over every week or every month. It like Maeve did, is figuring out like what it is that you want to do, going back to the sense of purpose and objectives. Because I'll kind of paraphrase that, I've heard this before, is people that have successful transitions to retirement are transitioning to something, not away from something. So, and to kind of put that even more clarity, is people that may be in a career that they absolutely hate, they think retiring is going to solve that problem. And more than likely, it's not. It's just you're going to find another problem in retirement. And again, along the way with Maeve's situation, is that having all the money that you need sometimes is still not enough because of this transition where you're programmed to save your entire life. And then you get to a point like almost immediately that, okay, now I have to start drawing down and using what I've saved. And that psychologically is a really tough road to get over.
It really is. It's so interesting. I just had a new client come in yesterday and we were talking about exactly this, someone who's at that retirement age. And, saving money is not a purpose. It's not a value, right? It's something that we do so that we can live out our purpose and live out our values. And that's just not how we've been taught a lot of the time. And so oftentimes, this is a slightly different question than what Maeve's asking, but oftentimes when I see people at that retirement age, there's this really painful transition from the identity that we've had as a worker,
Yes,
as a saver, right? I've worked so hard. I've seen myself as a something, right? Like, what do you do? That question, oh, what do you do? That's who we have been. And it's a really painful question to say, well, what do you do now that you're retired? And so I'm really trying to shift that to, what are you doing? Who are you, right? Who are you becoming? Because we do, I think, particularly in our culture, we can get so identified, and this is the fusion thing that we talk about in ACT, we get so identified with what we do, right? I am a psychologist, you are a financial planner. And yet then when we retire, what are we? And so I think if we can start, even earlier, starting to think, yeah, I am these things. And also that's just part of I'm the context that all of these things are playing out on. I'm a mom, I'm a psychologist, I'm a wife, I'm a friend, but at the core, I'm me. And what's important to me, that guides us so much better than identifying with the labels or the terminology that we've taken upon us to get where we want to go in life.
So as we try to wrap up this conversation, Dr. Jen, what would be one or two things that if you were talking to Maeve right now versus talking to me, what would you tell her? What action items could you give her, one or two, to be able to bridge this gap between the reality of her anxiety or fears and what can she actually do to close that gap between perceived and reality?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, I would say I love that she's noticing that this has been happening for her, because that's actually the very first step, is pulling back from those thoughts and saying, oh my goodness, I haven't been feeling safe to spend money. It sounds really simple, but if we don't notice that we're having the thoughts we're having, they've got us. Right? They've got us under their thumb. I really do kind of anthropomorphize thoughts, that they're happening to us. So I would say, first of all, congratulations. And that's amazing that you were brave enough to recognize this is not you. This is a thought. And I'd ask her to really listen. And, I know because you shared with me a little bit about what she wrote to you, listen to what those thoughts are saying, right? Because that's just a thought saying that thing. And really try to separate yourself.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Because that was the episode that she listened to, was using your thoughts as data.
Yes.
And that's what triggered her to think about this. So sorry, and I'll link to that episode in our show notes. But go ahead.
Beautiful. Yeah, I mean, she's really working on this, right? It's amazing, and I think it's a beautiful thing, and it's very brave. I think it's a really brave experience to say, wait a minute, what if these thoughts aren't actual reality, right? What if these thoughts are just thoughts? I don't mean just like they don't hurt, but they're not the entirety of who we are. So, first of all, I would really validate that she's doing that. And then go into some of that purpose, right? Talk about, if generosity is a value for you, what does that look like, right? How do you want to be remembered as a generous person? And what would be one tiny little thing that you'd be willing to try, driving that bus 2 feet in the direction of being generous, and just test it out, right? Again, that idea of thoughts as data, that what if we took some other data? Can you try being generous in this one way that would probably feel more aligned with your values, and just see what happens, right? Notice that maybe it feels good. Maybe you still have the thoughts, the fear thoughts, and you don't get kicked out of your home. You're not destitute. You get to have a little bit of that encouragement. It's these behavioral experiments of doing that, and then just trying to be mindful of what's actually happening in the moment, separating back from the reality of where your feet are right now versus what your thoughts are telling you is going to happen in the future, because that's actually not here right now. That's not real yet. What's real is what's happening in this moment.
Well, fabulous conversation as always. And for those listening and watching, because we actually, our YouTube channel is actually growing pretty well. So people actually are watching us. So whether you're listening or watching, hopefully this gives you the courage that if you have a topic or a question that you want Dr. Jen and I to cover, you're going to get on the channel for sure. Because I think, to your point, Dr. Jen, when people bring us this kind of feedback and these kinds of questions and thoughts, I think it does a really great job of turning what's theoretical on the psychology side of what you do into how we can put it to use in everyday life and everyday practice. So thank you, Maeve, for having the courage to share that with us, number one. And as always, Dr. Jen, thank you so much for your incredible insights on this topic, and we'll look forward to seeing you again here soon.
Thanks so much, Paul.
So going back through our conversation, I think the point that I want to highlight, that I've been highlighting with families that I've worked with for years and years and years, are these life transitions. And one of the most underrated life transitions, not talked about enough life transitions, is the retirement transition itself. This move from a career that's, for right or wrong, had a huge mark on your identity, who you are, to no longer having that, to identifying yourself as a saver, to now having to spend what you've saved. And I think with our listener question, that challenge is real. That psychological barrier to get over is real. Just because you have enough money, time, doesn't mean that there's not fear, anxiety around that, especially the money part. And having enough doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be able to spend it freely. And so as Dr. Jen was her emphasis was on bridging that gap between what we are thinking and what the reality of the situation is. And I think with our listener question with Maeve, it all starts again with awareness. Being able to dive a little deeper into why we feel the way that we do, what's happened in our past, what's currently going on today, what are the fears that we have about the future. How do we synthesize all that to be able to live the life we want, to align with that purpose and those objectives? And that's, I think, one of the points that I really want to get across on these conversations, especially those with Dr. Jen, on being able to have people understand the importance of taking the time to really think about this, to give yourself the time and space required to make great decisions. Now that you've made it to the end of another great conversation, are you looking for more? If so, head over to tamacapital.com, where you will find all of our conversations. Use the search feature to find the topic or guest you would love to learn more about. Also, don't forget to make someone else's day by sharing our show. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.